Hey, it's Chuck Armstrong with Loudwire Nights, and this is Loudwire Nights On Demand. I don't even know where to begin to say what an absolute privilege it was to have guitar gods Joe Satriani and Steve Vai on the show. This first aired on Friday, March 29th. Let's go. Well, it wasn't too long ago, someone emailed me and said, hey, would you like to talk to tonight's special guests? And I don't think I've ever replied to an email faster. I don't even know where to begin at introducing these two guys. So I'm just going to say they are two of the greatest guitarists alive, two of the greatest guitarists of all time. And they have finally joined forces for the first time ever. And we are celebrating that milestone tonight. Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, thank you guys so much for hanging on the show.
Right on. Nice to be here.
Yeah, nice to be here. Thank you, Chuck.
Yeah, so listen, the cat's out of the bag, man. Your new song, The Sea of Emotion Part 1, just came out today, and this new song is the first official release that finds the two of you collaborating and putting your chops down together. I got a lot of questions, but the first is just, what took so long to get to this point?
The thing is I would say where Steve and I are very much alike is that I think starting when we were teenagers, we made very detailed, elaborate plans about what we wanted to do musically. And we've been pretty stubborn, making sure that no one lets us deviate or interrupts our plans, So we always want to do this kind of a record, that kind of a tour, play with these people, develop this technique, write music like this. And Steve is a perfect example. I mean, you can look at all the things that he's been doing over the last few decades. It's an amazing outpouring of work, and it's really varied. And, each time I would call him and ask him, casually, what are you doing? He'd be saying, oh, I'm working on this orchestra piece, and I'm going to be going here, and then I got to go play with them. And I think, this is really funny. This is like my playbook where I'm just going down. So
yeah,
I think that we were thinking at some point when we work through this long list of things, our sort of musical bucket list, we'll eventually get around to saying, hey, you want to do an album?
Yeah, it is. And what's nice is all through these years, and Joe's right. When you have a driven musician with vision, they kind of march to the beat of their own drum. But all through the years, Joe and I have been kind of joined at the hips. We have done a lot of fun projects together. We've done the G3s, we've done various jams here and there, and surprise appearances and G3 records. And even beyond that, we've just always, besides staying in touch as friends, musically too, we share music. We get to share our releases with each other before anybody else hears them, So it's been really nice, but I agree with Joe, all along the way in the back of our minds, it's like, yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, we're going to do that. We're going to just, do that. And, the timing just feels perfect now because we've been making our solo records for decades and decades and touring. And it's just nice to be able to shift that. And it's not even so much of a shift in that, Joe and I kind of have similar musical interests, on the guitar and just musically. So the coming together and actually working together, in that intimate space of writing music and performing it together, it's just so nice, It's so much nicer than I was expecting. I feel like I've got like a brother, a partner, and I've never allowed myself to really collaborate like this before. And it's so rewarding and fulfilling. It's really great. And the music is just fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. Like, I love hearing that story, but also the song, man, the song is great. And, as I hear you guys say all that and talking about, of course you have played together and you've been on stage together and those kinds of things. Before I kind of heard the news, I would have bet my life that you had recorded together, that you had an official just Satriani and Vai release. But I would have lost that bet, so I'm glad I never made it. But, you know, hearing you say all that, and Steve, you talking about, you know, finding a brother in Joe, and Joe, you talking about, you know, having these meticulous plans all the way back when you were teenagers. I mean, this song, it's significant, not just because it's your first collaboration, but because it's personal for you, right? It goes back to those days of you making those plans. Can you kind of unpack the personal meaning behind this song?
Yeah, there's a place actually called the Sea of Emotion, and it's on the Carr Place High School, middle school, and kindergarten complex. It's a sort of a convoluted old New York story. You know, there was a farm owned by a family called the Rotkamps in the middle of this 2 square mile village called Carr Place. And that was the public school where Steve and I went to. And the memories of attending those 3 schools are really intense. Anyway, this one little spot outside the middle school gym, it was called Rushmore, that's the name of the school, was a parking lot, and there was a bit of a depression in the field that stretched out across.
How many acres?
I guess they were like hockey fields and lacrosse fields, and not very well maintained.
Yeah.
And they connected to the high school track, the football field, and the kindergarten off to the right. And then still the small Rotkamp farm was still part of the complex. And but we used to gather there after lots of crazy nights, you know, after midnight, and we would just wind up there letting our feelings out. It was an unusual place. And when you think about it, a bunch of high school kids letting their guard down and starting to talk about what was really bothering them or what they were really excited about, hopes and dreams. And so we started calling it the Sea of Emotion, because we would look out at this field and we would sort of pour our feelings out into it. And Steve, being a bit younger than myself, when I started teaching him, I decided to introduce him to that place, and he along with his friends. And so it became this fixture in our youth. For me, I can say it was instrumental in helping me grow up emotionally and understand my friends a little bit better, because we were just crazy rock and roll kids. But at some point you realize there's something more to us, and we need some sort of catalyst to help us connect to this other part. And it was through my high school band members, actually, you know, my lead singer, drummer, bass player. That's where I think we finally made that connection, was just hanging out there, probably drinking, smoking, and doing other things we weren't supposed to do at that location. And so I wanted to write a song about that as the first piece of music to help Steve and I sort of kick off the project.
Do you feel those memories, those emotions come back as you guys, you know, recorded this and as you played it?
I certainly did. I don't know, Steve, did you feel that?
Well, absolutely, because you know, being from a little bit of a generation younger than Joe, that field was also like ingress and egress. Everybody going to school, hanging out on the weekends, and it was sort of at times a den of iniquity. You know, we would just find all sorts of trouble to get into. But I recall after my lessons, occasionally we would just go in Joe's little Volkswagen Bug and sit in that parking lot and overlook this field. And for me, it was, I mean, for everybody that was able to engage in that way, it was special. But for me, it was uber special because I was this younger kid, and I had my hero there, basically. And we would just get into such wonderful, deep conversations. But when when we decided to, you know, get some music together for the tour, before I knew it, I was on tour and Joe was home. And before I knew it, he sent me these 2 tracks. And it was called The Sea of Emotion. And I'm like, yes, you know, there you go. This is like, it really connects us. And what's so interesting is how, you know, because when Joe writes his music, there's a pictorial in the mind. You know, there's an emotional dynamic of a pictorial or a story that he then seduces the right melody and chords out of his guitar to depict. You know, and it was just so interesting to listen to these tracks. Like the first single, part one. It's like the rough waters, in a sense, of this sea of emotion, and it sounds that way. You know, it's so interesting. And can I tell them a little bit about part three?
Yeah, sure.
Oh,
yeah.
let's go. Yeah, come on.
I got the two tracks, and I listened, and I said they definitely sound like Joe, and they're definitely rocking. And there's such beauty. The solo sections had these luscious chord changes, and so I thought, well, I actually have a digital copy, and I actually have the tape of the very first recording I ever did. And I remember when I was young, besides being fascinated with the guitar, I was also over the moon about recording and recording techniques. I wanted to know all about them, and I knew what a sound-on-sound, reel-to-reel tape recorder was, and that was as amazing to me as a guitar. And every time I went to Joe's house, he had one. You know, he had this sound-on-sound tape recorder. And I was playing the guitar for about a year and a half. And I was so, enthralled with this piece of gear. I started asking him about it. And he said, well, let's record something. So we set it up. And there's these two kids in a Long Island, bedroom, just jamming away. And Joe showed me this really great riff to play. And it was very difficult, actually, very difficult riff for a 13-year-old. And of course, I was flubbing my way through the whole thing. And the cool thing was that tape was then sent to me. Joe sent it to me maybe 10 years later or something. And I transferred it to digital. And I thought, I got an idea. I'm going to take a snippet of this little piece. It's a beautiful little piece. And I'm going to, build something out of that and then hand it off to Joe to decorate, so there is real history in these three movements. In that we have a recording of the first, I know it's the first thing I ever recorded in my life, and it's so cool to hear it. And then it kicks into the track. I'm so excited for people to hear that.
That's incredible. Yeah. So, man, like asking if those emotions or memories come back as you play this song. I mean, you literally have the piece of history for part three too. So, I mean, that's amazing. I love that. And that also answers a question, does part one sort of point to maybe something bigger? Because it kind of implies there might be other parts coming. So that's exciting too.
Well, the nice thing was I was listening to all three parts and I'm thinking, well, there's still something missing. It's that contemplative state of mind that we experienced while just sitting there and just being. And after I sent Joe what I was doing on part three, and he sent back his magnificent parts, he put a whole ending on it, a little ending, this dreamy kind of an ending. And I said, how did he know what I was thinking? Perhaps that we needed that. And I'm thinking, maybe I should try that. And there it is, poof. It's just, we just like, it's so nice when you have ESP with a friend.
Yeah, that's a nice thing, man. Steve, I want to ask you, you said kind of hanging and looking out at the sea of emotion. And, when Joe was there, you'd say like, man, my hero's here, and so you're a kid, right? A teenager. And Joe, you're not much older than Steve, just maybe
years.
A few years, just a different high school class. But at that point, Steve, you look to Joe as a hero type of, and I don't mean to say that literally, but just as this type of guy that you looked up to and wanted to learn from. And
you can be literal, and I wasn't the only one, because in my town, like any town, there's these young kids that are just infatuated with rock music and the guitar. And anybody that can play the guitar is like a hero, I mean, they could actually play. But Joe was, he was notches above that, because not only could he really play, he was just, sorry, Joe, but he was just cool. You know, he was just very solid and very classic musical taste, and everything he played just sounded beautifully musical. So myself and there was a whole group of us that were just so inspired and taught by Joe. So we were lucky.
Joe, what goes through your head as you hear that? As you think back, you're right. All of this is kind of reflecting on those years of looking out at the sea of emotion, but then to hear that too from Steve, like what goes through your head, man?
Yeah, it's
Those little jerks.
I think to summarize it, we were so lucky to grow up where we did, when we did, and to be surrounded by the people that took care of us and raised us, civilized us somehow. And so it's when I hear Steve talk about it, I hear in my mind all these great moments. I see all the great moments, and it really does take me back to, although it was crazy and rough and chaotic, it was at the same time a really beautiful time, and we were really fortunate to be able to grow in that environment. I mean, we did some crazy shit. I mean, I can't believe we made it out of the teenage
and nobody
years.
got hurt. Nobody ever got hurt, though.
We were just like, this far away from disaster, and there was the greatest rock and roll fun ever, and so it's amazing that we're still here, and but I it's funny when I go back and I listen to, let's say, that first track, the part one, I can see where I put in as much as I could of all the things that Steve and I were infatuated with, musically. You can hear a lot of Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and all these things. I knew that these were the signposts that would, trigger these great memories and then elicit really good, truthful, emotional performances from us. I wanted to make that the hallmark of this album, so that it wasn't just like two successful guys getting together and putting together a record of some kind. I wanted it to start from the heart, most importantly, to start there and let that guide us through. So having the Sea of Emotion part 1, 2, and 3 to sort of get us started has been great. It's been really great.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, and it is. It's cool. Listen, you guys are two internationally renowned guitarists, right? I mean, that's maybe even just an understatement in and of itself. But for you to come together and the first song you release is takes you back to when you were teenagers, the humble beginnings of Steve Vai and Joe Satriani and just hanging out like that and, barely making it out alive and all of that. I mean, that does sort of, what an impact that would make to me, the fan listening and me getting to get transported to that time and to that moment. And then even for myself, thinking back, what was I doing in high school? Who was I hanging out with? What were those memories like too? So I love it. I just got to say, as a fan of rock, as a fan of both of you, thank you for doing this. And here we are, however many decades later, finally with the two of you working together. And
when you see the video for the first song, you're going to have a 70s nostalgic hernia.
I love it. Listen, before we go, and Joe, if you'll indulge me, and if you don't want to, it's totally fine. But it's no secret to the Loudwire Nights audience that I'm a massive Metallica fan. And as a wannabe guitarist, I've always loved looking up to both of you and hearing about, Joe, how you taught Kirk and how you taught a lot of people. Steve, I'm looking at you. I know it's a loaded, silly question, but do you have any memory of that time with Kirk that maybe stands out to you above the rest that you'd share with the Loudwire crew tonight?
Well, there was really great great moments. It was a really interesting time because I was witnessing this younger generation create what was going to become a dominant style, for rock music. And it seemed so unlikely and so crazy and angry and aggressive, maybe on the outside, but in that little room of that little guitar store where I was giving lessons, they were really just really good kids who really had, they had a hold on this dream and they weren't going to let go. And Kirk was one of those kids that was so driven, and he really knew what he liked. He knew what he loved about music and about guitar, and he could play pretty well. He wasn't exposed to the information that Steve and I had been when we were being taught music theory at this high school by Bill Westcott, our music teacher. So there were really great moments where I was reminded of that, of where I came from, because of watching these young kids really absorb this new information and do something interesting with it. And you have to keep in mind that, Alex Skolnick would come in right after Kirk, and then Larry Lalonde would come in right after Alex, and Charlie Hunter would come right in, and Kevin Cadigan, and then David Bryce. I mean, all these young kids who were going to be on the radio 5 years later, dominating, were coming in and taking lessons. But they were still kids, and their parents would come and pay for their lessons, and they still had homework, and they had school books. I could relate to it, because I remember when Steve and I were just kids going to school, we'd have to do all that, but then as soon as we left school, it was rock and roll all the time. That's all we thought about. Going to be rock guitar gods someday, somehow,
I love that. I love hearing that too. Like, at the very start of this conversation, Joe, you mentioned how you guys had those meticulous plans and you made that. And then, even as kids, like, we're going to be rock guitar gods, man. And here we are, celebrating, the godliness of both of you, and then you guys are smiling and laughing and just like having such a good time about it too, and I love seeing that, and again, as a fan, like, it just makes it that much better and more fun for me to hear this music and to go back and revisit this music, because clearly it is part of you, and it's been part of you, and it's something that you've fought for, and you've just strived for decades, man.
And still, I was striving this morning earlier. Still trying to figure out how to play good.
Here, it never ends.
Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, congrats on the release of this new song, The Sea of Emotion Part 1, the upcoming record that it's pointing to, the other parts of The Sea of Emotion. And then we haven't even talked about it. We're just scratching the surface on everything, but this tour that you're on as well, and celebrating this collaboration and this partnership. And you can get tour dates at vi.com and satriani.com. And I can't wait to see this live. I can't wait to hear more of this stuff. So hopefully we can hang again soon.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
That wraps up this episode of Loudwire Nights on Demand. Stay caught up with everything happening in the world of rock and metal on the Loudwire app and at loudwire.com.